My name is Yegor, and here, in this moment as I kneel before the blade that will seal my fate, I want to tell how it all began. I was a servant in the castle of Ivan the Terrible, the first Tsar of all Russia, a man whose cruelty and sensitivity were as vast as the empire he built. I was taken to Ivan's castle in the dead of winter when Russia's snow seems to cover the entire world with its shroud of death. Ivan IV, as he was formerly called, was already a living legend of terror in our country. They said he had killed his own son in a fit of rage, cracking his skull with a scepter that now rested on his throne. He ordered tortures as if they were mere pastimes, watching his enemies be torn apart slowly as he died. His very title, the Terrible, wasn't a mere exaggeration. He was not just a harsh ruler, he was an executioner, a monster, a man who seemed to have made a pact with the devil himself. I knew all this when I was taken to the castle. I knew of the stories of men who were boiled alive in oil for questioning his orders, of women thrown to wolves just for disobeying a single glance from the Tsar. But what I didn't know was that within that castle, the stories were darker than anyone could imagine. The castle, built in Moscow, was breathtaking, but not with admiration, with fear. The walls, so thick they muffled the screams of the tortured, seemed to be covered in shadows that danced even without light. Where at the entrance, huge statues of warriors stood watch, their stone eyes seeming to follow your every movement. They said these warriors were souls Ivan had captured in battle and turned into stone through a pact with a sorcerer. From the very first day, something was wrong. I was assigned to maintain the cleanliness and organization of the banquet hall, a hall so vast that it seemed to swallow the light of the torches. There, Tsar Ivan presided over feasts with his most loyal men, the Oprichniki, a private guard that terrorized Russia in his name, dressing in black and carrying ferocious dogs with them, along with emblems of dog heads, symbols of loyalty to the Tsar. Their presence made the air heavier, as if the darkness itself took shape. I heard stories from the other servants. They said Ivan bathed in the blood of the enemies he tortured, and that, on nights with a full moon, he wandered the castle corridors, muttering words in ancient language that no one understood. Some said he spoke to the shadows, that he bargained with spirits to maintain his power. There was a legend about a secret room, a room where he made a pact with a spirit called Kashai, an immortal being who, in exchange for human lives, offered forbidden knowledge. I didn't want to believe it, but something was wrong in the castle. Something was breathing. One night, I was called to the Tsar's quarters. The atmosphere was icy, the fire in the hearth seemed incapable of warming the room. Ivan sat before a table, holding an old, stained piece of parchment. His eyes, as cold and merciless as the Russian winter itself, fixed on me. "Yegor," he murmured, and his tone was too soft for the terror it evoked. "You know the price of failure." He smiled, and at that moment, I saw the outlines of something moving in the shadows around him. They weren't guards, they weren't human. Something hissed, and I felt the chill of death on my neck. "Oh, Tsar, I would never fail," I stammered, but he laughed, a low sound, almost amused, as if my plea was that of a child. "We shall see," he said, handing me a small object, a rag doll. "This is you," he continued, and before I could ask what he meant, he squeezed the doll in his hands. I screamed, a searing pain, a crushing in my chest, as if the very air was being sucked from my lungs. I collapsed to my knees, breathless. Ivan released the doll, and the pain stopped. He leaned over me, his eyes boring into mine. "Never disappoint me, Igor." I returned to my quarters that night, but sleep wouldn't come. The legends and whispers became more real. On my pillow, I found strands of hair that weren't mine, and I saw scratch marks on the wood of my door, marks that hadn't been there before. The other servants were changing too, their faces pale, eyes always wide, as if expecting to see something terrible at any moment. "Have you heard about the ghosts?" a colleague whispered once, staring blankly ahead. They were the first to fall to Ivan's hands, and now they can't leave. One night, returning from my duties, I saw something I will never forget. In the castle gardens, where statues of saints had been replaced by grotesque stone figures, I saw a woman, pale, with long, tangled hair, dressed in rags. She was crying, but her cry made no sound. When our eyes met, she opened her mouth in a silent scream, and I saw she had no tongue. Terrified, I ran inside, but no matter how hard I tried to forget, I couldn't shake her image from my mind. And then I started dreaming of her. Every night she appeared, each time closer. Her lips formed the words, but no voice emerged. Sweating and panicking, I found the doll Ivan had given me. Now it was stained with dried blood. Then came the fateful day. I was summoned once more to the throne room. There was Ivan, holding my doll, now dyed a deep red. Behind him, the figure of the tongueless woman suspended like a puppet, her hollow eyes fixed on me. "You saw her, didn't you?" Ivan asked. I didn't respond. "Oh, Yegor, there are so many things you don't know." He looked at me with a smile of pure delight, and it's too late to learn. I was dragged to the execution hall, and the executioner raised the blade. "Ivan never dies," whispered the man beside me. "He takes the blood of those who perish and starts again always." When the blade finally fell, there was a brief moment of silence, as if time itself had stopped. But I didn't feel death. Instead, I am here, back on the first day, walking through the corridors, the fear growing. I will never leave this place. Maybe Ivan is right. Maybe he never dies. And maybe I will never be free.
I remember the smell of freshly baked bread that morning, wafting from the bakery. The warm air was still pleasant, and the sound of the marketplace was beginning to come alive, with the murmur of familiar voices filling the streets of Pompeii. I was selling spices. I had just opened my small shop on Via dell'Abbondanza, one of the busiest streets in the city. Birds chirped around the Temple of Apollo, and horses clattered their hooves on the worn stones, restless as their owners haggled over fresh fruit and goods. Everything seemed normal, but the animals, something about them was wrong. The dogs were restless, pacing in circles and barking at nothing. I saw some of them howling, as if sensing something terrible in the air. On the horizon, beyond the temples and marble statues, Mount Vesuvius stood still, silent as ever, but a thin plume of smoke began to rise slowly from the crater. No one paid attention. Vesuvius, our old neighbor, was a sleeping guardian, and we Pompeians never truly worried about him. But shortly after midday, the air began to change. Something suffocating and dense hung over the streets. I first felt a chill crawl up my spine, a feeling I couldn't explain. Then, there was a roar like the sound of 1,000 thunderstorms at once, but distant, deep. The ground trembled beneath my feet. The noise grew louder, reverberating between the buildings and echoing through the hills. I ran to the main square, the confusion rising around me. The forum, which minutes before was the center of trade and life, turned into a place of confusion and fear. People began spilling out of their homes, looking up at the sky. Vesuvius, the giant, had finally awoken. The sky, once blue, began to darken. Ash started to fall like a storm. I looked around and saw nothing but terrified faces, all with the same question in their eyes. What was happening? Within minutes, chaos erupted. Some screamed for us to flee to the port. Others clung to their statues of gods and goddesses, as if begging for divine protection. But the gods were silent. They didn't hear us. I started running. My feet pounded against the hot stones as the ground continued to shake violently. Bodies piled up in the narrow streets as everyone tried to escape at once, shoving each other in desperation. I remembered my wife, Lucilla, and our children. They were home, far from the market. But I couldn't turn back. The way was blocked by the desperate crowd. I saw faces I knew, friends who shopped at my store, other merchants. One of them, Marco, a fabric seller, was trampled in front of me as he tried to get up. I wanted to help him, but I was pushed forward by the frantic mass. Screams and cries filled the air. Vesuvius kept roaring, now louder and closer, as if hell itself was opening. The ash was falling thicker. I saw faces I knew, friends who shopped at my store, other merchants. One of them, Marco, A fabric seller was trampled in front of me as he tried to get up. I wanted to help him, but I was pushed forward by the frantic mass. Screams and cries filled the air. Vesuvius kept roaring, now louder and closer, as if hell itself was opening. The ash was falling thicker. My eyes burned. My throat felt like it was on fire. The heat was unbearable, and the stench of sulfur and death mixed with the smell of burning bodies. Houses crumbled around us. The city was dissolving under the weight of destruction. The horses, once elegantly pulling carriages, had gone mad. They charged through the streets, knocking down anyone in their way, their eyes wild with panic. Birds fell from the sky, suffocated by the smoke. Dogs howled in agony, their fur covered in scorching ash. I could hear the crackling of fires starting to consume the city. I desperately tried to find shelter, but there was nowhere safe. Stones rained from the sky, large and heavy, smashing roofs and skulls alike. I ran toward the Temple of Jupiter, a grand structure that had once seemed untouchable in the center of the square. I thought the gods might protect me there, but even the temple began to crumble, its giant columns collapsing like toys before the fury of the mountain. I found a small group of people huddled in a corner, trying to shield themselves from the heat. Their eyes were empty, as if they had already accepted the end. But I couldn't. I couldn't just wait for death. My legs ached, my lungs burned, but I kept running. I didn't know where to go. I just ran. Every step was harder than the last. The ash covered me like a shroud of death, suffocating, weighing me down. Finally, my strength left me. I fell to my knees on the rough, hot ground. And it was then that I realized there was no escape. The sky was as dark as night, though it was still afternoon. And on the horizon, the wave of fire and molten rock was descending quickly, consuming everything in its path. I couldn't stand anymore. All I could do was look around one last time, my vision blurred by smoke and pain. Pompeii, my home, my life, was disappearing, sinking beneath an eternal shroud of ash. Everything I had ever known and loved was being destroyed before my eyes. The last thing I felt was the suffocating heat enveloping me. And everything went dark, like a candle blown out by a cruel wind.
I arrived at the monastery of São Miguel in the harsh winter of 1348. I was summoned by the Holy Inquisition to investigate a mystery that had already claimed the lives of 4 monks under inexplicable circumstances. The violence of their deaths and the silence surrounding them were disturbing. Something was deeply wrong in that place. As I passed through the rusted iron gates, I felt the weight of the cold air, as if the very earth carried a dark secret. The monastery was an imposing structure, its stone walls worn down by centuries, and its towers rising against the leaden sky. But it was in the silence and the gloom of its interior that the real terror seemed to hide. I was greeted by the abbot, an aged and taciturn man, whose eyes carried the burden of a fear he dared not name. He led me through the courtyard to the central church, where a sacred relic had recently been rediscovered after centuries of being forgotten. An ancient cross, worn by time, yet still bearing dark stains that the monks claimed were blood. This relic, buried in a crypt beneath the altar, had been exhumed after a monk claimed to have received a vision during prayer, showing him where it was hidden. It was at that moment that the horrors began. Every monk who had touched or prayed near the cross had died a horrific death. First, their bodies became feverish, their eyes turned mad, and then came endless screams that echoed throughout the abbey until their final moments of agony. I decided to investigate, but something about the cross deeply unsettled me. There was a metallic smell in the air, as if the very blood had soaked into the space. I felt a chill when I noticed that the dark stains on the wood seemed fresh, as though the blood continued to slowly seep from an ancient, still open wound. That night, I dreamed of the cross. In my dream, it was not an inert object, but a living presence, breathing, pulsating with a malevolent energy. I saw shadows moving around it, human figures distorted by pain and despair. I awoke drenched in cold sweat, my heart racing, feeling the icy touch of death close by. The next day, I discovered that one of the younger monks had disappeared. His quarters were ransacked, the bed soaked with sweat, and the only clue was a trail of wet footprints leading toward the crypt beneath the church. With a heavy heart, I descended into the depths of the crypt. Each step echoed like a muffled scream. When I reached the bottom, I saw something that froze my blood. The young monk was kneeling before the cross, but his body was immobile, rigid like a statue. As I approached, I realized his eyes were wide open, staring into the void as if he had witnessed something beyond human comprehension. Blood dripped from his mouth, as though something inside him had been corrupted to its very core. It was then that I felt it. The cross was watching me. The weight of the cursed boar struck me with full force. The relic was no sacred blessing, but a trap. It was a remnant of a long-forgotten pagan ritual, a blood offering that should never have been unearthed. Each monk who succumbed to madness and death was merely another sacrifice to feed the cross, to keep it alive. I knew I had to destroy it. I couldn't let more souls be taken. But as I tried to approach, the atmosphere changed. The air around the cross grew dense, difficult to breathe, and the space around me seemed to shrink. I began to hear whispers, ancient voices, mingled in a cacophony of indistinct sounds that pressed upon me from all directions. They called me by name. In a desperate act, I pulled the young monk away from the cross, dragging his lifeless body to the entrance of the crypt. But the shadows, they were there. I saw distorted forms moving along the walls, grotesque caricatures of human beings, presences that could never be explained by words or faith. Something beyond my understanding had been awakened, and now it pursued those who dared to challenge it. I fled the crypt, sealing the entrance with boards and chains. I begged the abbot to burn the cross, but he refused, claiming it was a sacred relic, that it would protect us. There were no more deaths in the days that followed, but the evil remained. I felt the presence of the cross in my dreams, calling me back, pulling me into that infernal abyss where no soul should tread. When I left the monastery, I carried with me a terrible certainty. That cross was not proof of divinity, but of something much older and more malevolent. A remnant of a time when blood fed forgotten gods, and now it was waking again, waiting for its next victim. Even after all these years, I still hear the whispers in the darkness, and every time I close my eyes, I see the cross, always waiting, and I know that one day it will find me again.
We used to be many, so many that around the fire we were almost a single voice, our bodies warm beside each other, sharing stories of our victories over the cold and the hunts. Now we are few. I never thought that settling our tents and building walls from the river stones would make us fragile. But since our tribe spread out along this valley, something strange has been lurking around us. The first to vanish was Agruk's son, a restless boy who often snuck out at night to hunt small creatures. No one saw him leave. When we woke up, his bed was empty. His father tried to track him, but there was no sign. It was as if the boy had simply vanished, leaving only silence in the night. At first, we thought he'd just wandered off, maybe playing a childhood game. Some even laughed about it. But the nights that followed were different. More vanished. First, our younger hunters, the ones who slept on the village outskirts. Then, even the warriors, those who were never afraid of anything. Now, when darkness covers the sky, even I, who have faced the blood of enemies, feel a chill up my spine that I can't shake. I am the firekeeper, the guide of those who remain. It's my duty to light the first flame at night and keep it burning until dawn, to guard the warmth that protects us from the darkness. But even I, with my spear and alert ears, feel as if something is watching me. Tonight, I watch carefully, scanning every corner of the village, alert to the slightest movement. The fire burns low now. There's barely enough wood left, and no one dares to gather more. Only 3 of us remain around the embers, and we are all on edge. A strange sound came from the northern side, where the old cave is, the one that the elders say is where the spirits of our ancestors dwell. It was a whisper, almost a call. Our eyes met, and something, maybe foolish courage or pure desperation, urged us to rise and walk toward it. When we arrived, the cave was just as it always is, silent and empty. But the marks? There were deep claw marks, as if something far larger than any beast we've ever known had tried to break free from inside. Maybe you'd think we're foolish, but you didn't hear what we heard. A whisper that came from neither the wind, nor the earth, nor any animal. A low voice that seemed to call the names of those who disappeared. I tried to stand firm. I am the leader, but my legs trembled. One of the warriors, my hunting brother, knelt and touched the marks, as if he were trying to decipher an ancient language. And then his eyes. I saw the terror in them. He turned to me and muttered, "They're still there." I didn't wait to hear more. A shadow, dark and cold as the night itself, swept across the cave, and my warriors ran. All of them except one. He stayed, staring into the darkness as if spellbound. I returned alone. I didn't tell the others. I had no strength left to explain what I couldn't understand. Those who remained asked about him, but I only said he chose to follow the spirits. Can you feel it? It's as if the night itself breathes, as if it tightens around us, waiting for the right moment to swallow us whole. Once again, silence. Once again, I feel the absence, the emptiness where once there were voices. I look around the fire, and we are no longer 3. Only 2 remain now. The last warrior beside me, my childhood friend, whispers that we should leave the valley. Go far, maybe even return to the life of wandering. But where would we go? Back to a world without the stones we built. Leave behind the fire we worked so hard to bring together. Is that the price of survival? But no, I will run. If these shadows want me, let them come. Tonight, I'll sit beside the fire until it dies out, until the night faces me with nothing between us. I am the leader, and I am the last one left. At dawn, there will either be light, or emptiness will take over everything. And perhaps they're only waiting for the fire to go out.
Samarkand, 1403, a city where the desert winds whispered ancient secrets and the turquoise domes of its mosques shimmered under the harsh sun. I had heard of its fabled wealth, its knowledge that stretched from Persia to China, and its unrivaled marketplaces. But I hadn't come for gold or silk. No, what drew me here was far darker, a relic said to be cursed, hidden away in the labyrinthine corridors of the Pearl Market. It was the early morning, the market already buzzing with life. The streets smelled of spices and leather, and the merchants' cries filled the air. My contact had warned me. Find the Kalandar Gate, the one none dare enter. Beyond that lies your path. I found the gate tucked away, half buried in sand and forgotten by most. It was old, its once intricate carvings now worn by time, but still intimidating. No one came near. My gut twisted, but I had already come too far. Stepping through, it felt as if the world behind me faded into silence, replaced by a hollow wind that tasted of iron. The market on the other side was unlike the bustling world I had just left. Here, it was deathly quiet. Rows of dilapidated stalls, draped in torn silks, stood abandoned. The air felt wrong, thick, suffocating, yet I pressed on. I passed by stalls of forgotten trinkets, jeweled daggers, and ancient manuscripts, but none of them interested me. My eyes sought something more, sinister. Then, at the farthest end of the street, I saw it. A small, unremarkable tent, its entrance flanked by 2 ivory statues of lions. They stared, lifeless and cold. The Pearl of Khatun, the object I sought, was said to be housed within. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the temperature drop. A figure sat at the back, hooded, his face obscured by shadow. "You seek the pearl," he rasped, his voice a blend of gravel and whispers. He extended a skeletal hand toward a chest, its surface blackened and charred. My heart raced as I reached out, but something held me back. A memory, a warning, crept into my mind. I had heard stories of Timur the Lame, the ruthless conqueror who had once sought the same pearl. He had ravaged the lands, carving his way through Persia, sacking cities, leaving only ash in his wake. Yet upon reaching Samarkand, he had returned empty-handed. Some said it was the pearl that cursed him, turning his victory into dust. I hesitated, but curiosity, foolish and irresistible, drove me. I opened the chest. Inside, it lay on a bed of red silk, glowing faintly like the moon. As I touched it, the tent around me seemed to dissolve, replaced by a vast, empty desert. I stood alone under a blood-red sky, and the wind howled. I blinked, and suddenly I was not alone. Figures emerged from the sands, warriors, merchants, mothers, children. Their eyes were hollow, their faces twisted in agony. They did not speak, but I could feel their pain, their suffering, pouring into me. Timur's army, I whispered as it dawned on me. They had been here, just like I was now. These were not mere phantoms. They were remnants, souls bound to this cursed land, drawn to the pearl like moths to flame. I turned to run, but the desert stretched on endlessly. My breath came in ragged gasps. Then I saw her, a woman cloaked in black, her eyes glowing a deep, haunting violet. The Khatun. You seek what was never yours to claim. Her voice echoed in my head, though her lips never moved. I fell to my knees, the weight of her presence unbearable. My mind screamed for release, but my body was paralyzed. She stepped closer, her hands reaching out, her cold fingers brushing my skin. Wait, please. I choked out, but my voice was swallowed by the desert. Just as I thought the darkness would consume me entirely, I found myself back in the tent, the pearl still in my hand. The hooded figure was gone, the market outside silent. But something had changed. I could feel it. Something was with me now, watching, waiting. I left the pearl market in a daze, not fully understanding what had happened, but knowing I had unleashed something far worse than any curse I had imagined. Days passed. I thought perhaps it was over, that the pearl's curse had left me untouched. But then the dreams began. Visions of Timur's soldiers, their bodies withering under the desert sun, their cries echoing in my mind. Each night they grew stronger, more vivid. And then, in broad daylight, as I walked through Samarkand's bustling streets, I saw them again. Those hollow-eyed figures. They stood among the living, unnoticed by everyone but me. Their eyes followed my every move, unblinking, accusing. Could feel their hatred, their sorrow, crushing me from all sides. I tried to run, but no matter where I went, through the parks, the bazaars, even the palaces, they were there, always watching. I had become marked. There was no escaping them. One evening, as I sought refuge in the Bibi Kenan Mosque, hoping the sacred air might offer protection, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. Turning, I saw her again, the Khatun, her eyes burning brighter than ever. You are bound now, she whispered. You carry their pain, their fate. Before I could respond, the air around me thickened. The walls of the mosque seemed to close in, and the haunting silence returned. There was no escape. The curse had already sunk its claws into my soul, dragging me deeper into a void from which no light could reach. And as I write this now, I know this is only the beginning.
My name is Nebo, son of a weaver, born in the shadows of the great walls of Babylon. I lived my life like any other common man in our grand city. I was not a warrior, nor a noble, just a plebeian, walking through the crowded streets, feeling the scorching heat of the Babylonian sun while performing the simple tasks of daily life. But what I witnessed during the fall of our city would forever change the way I understood the world of the living. That morning, the city seemed as alive as ever. Merchants sold their wares in the market, the air filled with the scent of spices and incense. I was walking towards the Isagila temple, where Marduk, the Almighty, reigned supreme, or so we believed. The hot wind subtly blew through the stone streets, and I felt an unease, a growing discomfort, as if the very air was heavy with dark omens. The rumors were inescapable. Cyrus the Great's army was near. The walls whispered stories of betrayal, of gates that would open from within. But no one believed that a city like Babylon, protected by Marduk, would fall so easily. No one except me. Something haunted me deeply, an invisible shadow I could not shake. Something was wrong with the world. Something was wrong with the gods. I continued my way to the market, trying to stifle these anxieties, but the unease grew like a weight in my chest. When I reached the main square, things began to change. The clouds that once merely hovered became thick, and the sky took on a bronze hue, as if the sun had been smothered by the gods. The people around me continued their lives, seemingly blind to what was happening. It was then that I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet. The sound of the walls breaking echoed throughout the city like distant thunder. Cyrus was here. Chaos erupted. Screams filled the air, and panic spread like a plague. The streets, once full of life, were now filled with people running in all directions, seeking a safe place. But there was no safety. I ran towards the Isagila temple, not out of faith, but because I felt something deeper was happening. When I arrived at the temple, the air was thick, almost tangible. The statues of gold and stone seemed distorted, and then I saw him, Marduk, not as a statue, but as a living presence, hovering above the temple, shrouded in shadows and golden light. He wasn't there to protect us. The face that had once been revered was now twisted in pure rage. The prayers that had echoed in my mind since childhood turned into empty hums. He was furious with us, his worshippers, but not because we had failed him. No, he was furious because we had forgotten what we truly were. Tools, nothing more than disposable pieces in a divine game. The ground began to open up around me, not with fire or destruction, but with a dark veil. The shadows rose from the cracks, dancing and taking shape, and it was then that I realized that true horror. Marduk wasn't just judging, he was sealing a curse over the city. In my mind, an ancient voice, cold as death, whispered, "You who have failed, who did not protect what was given to you, shall be the ghosts of the city, cursed to walk eternally through the ruins. Your souls will never rest. Your names will be erased from history as if you never existed." Then something unexpected happened. My skin began to burn, but it wasn't the usual heat of Babylon. It was as if some ancient energy was being poured into me, rooting itself inside my body. I looked at my hands and saw, horrified, that small marks began to appear, etched directly into my skin, symbols I couldn't recognize. They seemed to move, writhing like living serpents. I felt intense pain. It was as if something was trying to take control, as if I was being devoured from the inside out. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath, my hands touching the stone floor. The marks spread, crawling up my arms and chest. I tried to fight it, but it was useless. The energy filling me was not of life, but something much darker. I was being transformed, doomed to become an extension of Marduk's curse. Around me, the temple descended into chaos. The shadows that had emerged from the cracks now formed figures, grotesque and distorted, wandering through the temple, each marked with the same symbols now engraved on my skin. The statues of lesser gods split in half, as if something invisible was tearing them apart from within. I knew then what was happening. Marduk was trapping our souls, our lives, within ourselves. He would turn us into living shadows, condemned to wander the ruins forever, never finding peace, never escaping the cycle of suffering. In despair, I dragged myself to the temple entrance. I needed to leave to flee from this evil energy before it completely overtook me. But when I looked outside, the city was no longer the Babylon I knew. The streets were covered in a thick, almost supernatural fog, and indistinct shapes moved within it. Other citizens, condemned like me, deformed by the curse. I was no longer in Babylon. I was in a land between worlds, a place where time and space made no sense. What had started as a mere mortal conquest had now become a divine plan of destruction and eternal suffering. Cyrus the Great was just the instrument. The real power came from Marduk, and his wrath would now fall upon all of us. But there was something more. A deep sound, a rhythmic thumping that I could not ignore, came from the heart of the city. At first, I thought it was war drums, but then I realized the truth. They were heartbeats. The very city of Babylon was alive, pulsing with Marduk's dark energy. Each beat made the ground tremble, and I could feel the world around me unraveling, as if the city was about to collapse in on itself. With the last strength I had, I ran through the fog-covered streets, trying to escape this cycle of pain. But the city's heartbeats intensified, getting closer, louder, and I knew my time was running out. There was no escape. Marduk had sealed me in a fate of eternal suffering, along with all the others. Then I realized, we were not just victims, we were the sacrifice. The sacrifice so that the glory of Babylon would never be forgotten, but that we, its souls, would never rest. Each beat of the city's heart would echo for eternity, and our souls would continue to wander, trapped between this world and the next, never knowing peace, only the eternal reminder of a city that devoured us. And so, as I feel the shadows closing in on me, I hear the heartbeats getting louder, stronger, closer. I know what is coming. Soon, I too will join the pulse of the city, forever lost in the cursed ruins of Babylon.
On a winter twilight in 1582, my name was Malcolm Murray, one of the closest advisors to James IV. My role, they say, was to manage the kingdom's finances, ensuring the coffers of Edinburgh Castle remained full and that the king had everything he desired. But life at court wasn't just numbers and coins. It was the whisper of old legends echoing through the stone corridors, the shadows that danced along the walls, the oppressive weight of history. Edinburgh Castle was a sleeping giant haunted by memories that echoed through the windy nights. Stories told by soldiers and servants were enough to chill the blood. Prisoners who vanished, moans from the dungeons, ghosts of fallen warriors wandering in search of justice. There was something more, a shadow that seemed to stretch into every corner of the castle, something unseen but felt deep within the soul. One night, the king summoned me in secret. "Malcolm," he whispered, "I have seen something." His eyes were dim, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. He spoke of a spirit that visited him at night, a female figure dressed in rags, her skin pale and eyes empty. He knew, as did I, the tales of the White Lady, a spectre wandering the halls, eternally trapped in mourning over her execution hundreds of years ago within those very walls. And yet, there was something more in James's eyes, something that hinted this was no ordinary legend. I assured him I would investigate thoroughly, although in my heart, a sense of unease was already growing. The first presentiment occurred as I descended into the crypts, where an unnatural chill enveloped me, as if the air itself refused to touch my skin. There I found an old manuscript abandoned, its pages yellowed by time. As I opened it, a single word seemed to pulse in red: Decade, Gaelic for seek or follow. My fingers trembled as I touched the page, and for a moment I saw, oh God, I saw the figure of the king himself reflected in a puddle of water that didn't exist, with his eyes gouged out and mouth agape in an eternal scream. In the following days, I dedicated myself to further investigation. The reports were numerous but vague. They said the White Lady was merely a shadow of a greater horror, something dating back to ancient times when pagan rituals were performed on the castle stones to appease a hungry entity. The more I read, the more I felt that this story was far more than a mere legend. Something was awakening, something that craved blood, that demanded sacrifice. The second presentiment came during a morning walk through Edinburgh's markets. I was distracted, lost in my thoughts, when a gypsy approached me. She looked directly into my eyes and said, "The moon will reflect your soul, counselor, and when you see your face in the darkness, it will be too late." Her tone was serious, threatening. Those words stayed with me, crawling through my mind like serpents in the dark. The final night arrived. The king summoned me once more, pale as death, and spoke of what he had seen. She was there, Malcolm, inside the mirror. She showed me my future. James was trembling, sweat dripping down his forehead. Cautiously, I asked him to take me to the mirror. It was an ancient artifact, kept in the deepest part of the castle, where the air seemed heavier. The moment I entered the room, a chill ran down my spine. The walls seemed to vibrate, pulsing with some strange energy. When I looked into the mirror, I felt my heart stop for a second. There was no reflection, only emptiness. And then I saw a movement behind me. Oh no! I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. The king stood pale, his eyes fixed on the mirror. And then she appeared, the White Lady. Not as an ethereal ghost, but as flesh and blood, her face twisted into a mask of agony. She looked at me, her hollow eyes burning into my soul, and whispered, "The cycle must be completed." The door behind us slammed shut, locking us inside. The king tried to run, but I was paralyzed, hypnotized by the figure that now approached us. She didn't walk, no. She floated, as if the ground was unworthy of her touch. When she reached out to the mirror, its liquid surface turned to blood, dripping down the walls. The truth then hit me like a cold blade. I was next. I was to be the sacrifice. The manuscript, the warnings, the gypsy's words, they all pointed to this moment. "No!" I screamed, trying to open the door, but it was useless. James began muttering prayers, but his words were incoherent, fragmented. Despair swallowed us whole. The lady approached and touched my forehead. All of a sudden, I felt the weight of the castle's entire history. Every soul, every death, every drop of blood spilled. She didn't just want my body. She wanted my essence, my very existence, to feed her eternal torment. A voice whispered in my mind. It wasn't the lady's voice, it was my own. "You always knew, Malcolm. You always knew this moment would come." And in a flash, I realized that I had made a pact long before becoming an advisor. I was the one responsible for the curse, for that entity's hunger centuries ago. And this was my end, a death destined since the dawn of time. Without warning, the mirror cracked, and on the other side I saw my reflection. But it wasn't me. It was the king, with the same terrified gaze, and in his face I saw the smile of the White Lady. She was me. I was her, trapped in an endless cycle of pain and madness. In the final moment, as the mirror shattered, I was pulled into it. The world around me dissolved into darkness and cold, and all that remained was the sound of my own screams echoing in the depths of Edinburgh Castle. I never left that place, never, and I'm sure I shall not.
In the year of our Lord, 1374, the Abbey of St. Aurelius rested on the edge of the known world, perched upon the mist-shrouded hills of Germania. It was a place of severity, where the only permitted sound was the monks' chants echoing through cold stone corridors. Time there was not marked by the sun, forever veiled in clouds, but by the tolling of bells announcing the divine office. I am Brother Camradus, a scribe. My life is devoted to transcribing the scriptures, adorning manuscripts with arabesques of gold and celestial blue. My days follow a rigid cycle. At dawn, prayer. At midday, work. At dusk, more prayer. And at night, solitary vigils in the scriptorium. I found comfort in this unchanging rhythm until I was tasked with restoring the book. When the abbot handed me the volume, I knew immediately it was no ordinary text. Its cover was blackened leather, marked with symbols I did not recognize. Letters that seemed to writhe under the light. The parchment inside was fragile, but the abbot, his eyes stern, insisted it was my duty to restore it. "It is a sacred relic," he said in a voice as cold as the stone walls around us. I dared not ask more, though curiosity burned within me like embers beneath ash. The first night was uneventful. I cleaned the pages, removing mold that seemed to writhe under my touch. It was meticulous work, and at first, nothing unusual occurred. But on the second night, I heard them. Voices. Low, murmured, in languages I had never studied. They were faint, like the wind sighing through the cracks in the scriptorium walls. At first, I dismissed them as my imagination, or perhaps echoes of distant chants. But the voices grew clearer, each syllable pulsing as if spoken directly into my ear. "Comrades, listen." No, I wasn't mistaken. They knew my name. For weeks, I continued my work, growing more absorbed each day. The voices accompanied me constantly. At first, I begged the Lord to deliver me from their torment, but over time, I began to listen, hesitantly at first, then with unsettling eagerness. They whispered secrets, phrases that pulled at my mind like a hook dragging a fish from the depths. As the days passed, I noticed changes in the abbey. The air grew heavier, damp with a chill that made each breath a labor. My brothers, once steadfast, began to falter, or was it fear I saw in their eyes? One of them, Brother Johannes, was found kneeling before the altar, his gaze empty, muttering incoherent words until his voice finally gave out. The abbot, strangely, said nothing. His eyes, however, bore into me with a mixture of expectation and dread. It was on the final night that I understood. I had restored the book's last page. As I smoothed the parchment, it felt newly alive, as if my touch had awakened it. A symbol glowed, a star with 8 points entwined by serpents. The voices rose in a chorus, no longer whispering. They commanded, "Read." My hands, once so steady, trembled, yet I obeyed. I made the mistake of gazing upon the words etched into the page. I cannot describe them fully. They were not mere letters, but living things writhing under my scrutiny. As I spoke them aloud, I felt something leave me. A familiar warmth drained from my body, replaced by a cold void. And then I saw my brothers consumed by shadows that slithered like worms. I saw the abbot on his knees, his eyes darkened to embers as a black veil swallowed his face. I saw the abbey dissolve, melting like wax beneath an invisible flame. But worse than seeing was feeling. I felt that the voices were something far older than the world itself, something that had always lingered, waiting for a curious, foolish soul to release it. Now, you might wonder, if he's narrating, how can he no longer be alive? The answer is simple, though it's better if you do not fully grasp it. I am an echo, nothing more. The words you hear now are like those of the book, alive, but empty of the one who spoke them. If you hear my voice, it is because the book has found you. It needs someone to continue its work. It calls.
I am Ranvil, High Priest of Gamla Uppsala, the ancient seat of the gods' worship in the heart of the Swedish lands. We are at the center of what was once the holiest kingdom, where offerings of men, horses, and gold are made in the name of Thor, Freyr, and above all, Odin. Here, in the core of this frozen world, stood the Great Hall, and the burial mounds of ancient kings who ruled with wisdom and brutality. It was the late 9th century, and the village was quiet, a silence that chilled my soul. The great block festival, when human and animal sacrifices were offered, was approaching. I had spent years in this position, overseeing these ceremonies, watching executions with the coldness my title required. But this year, something was weird. The first night began like any other, with merchants crowding the markets around the temple. Wolf and bear pelts filled the stalls, while weapons and cult objects were sold to visitors from far and wide, from small villages or even distant cities like Burka. The torches lit the path between the market and the grove where the sacrifices would take place. Yet a growing unease filled my chest. We had captured Saxon prisoners for the ritual. Their lives would be given to Odin, the Allfather. But as Thor's hammer crushed the skull of the first, something changed in the air. I felt the presence of an ancient force. A chill ran down my spine, the kind no winter could bring. It was as if the ground itself trembled, a deep vibration echoing from the land of the dead. I gazed toward the sacred grove, where ancient trees bent, appearing like dark, distorted shadows. The wind carried whispers, ancient murmurs, as if the gods were warning me of something. On the second night, the signs became clearer. The oxen meant for sacrifice were found dead by morning, their eyes gouged out and bodies swollen as if poisoned by something not of this world. Men from the village began having visions. They spoke of ghostly figures at the forest edge, cloaked shapes that didn't belong to the gods we knew. My hands trembled as I lit the torches around the hall. I, who had never feared death or rituals, felt a fear I had never known. It was as if an invisible veil between our world and the realm of the dead was disintegrating. The village elder, a wise man, approached me with terror in his eyes. He spoke of an ancient spirit known as Draugr, a cursed being that returns from the grave. On the third day, something terrible happened. The moon hung high, and the darkness of the forest surrounding the village seemed deeper, older. I was alone in the temple, preparing the final sacrifice, when I heard heavy footsteps. The empty hall echoed, and for a moment I thought it was one of the warriors. But when I turned, I saw a figure that should not have been there. It was a man, tall and hooded. His clothes were in tatters, as if they had rotted over centuries. His eyes glowed with a spectral blue light, and his face was partially decayed, marked by decomposition. The stench of death clung to him, like the odor of corpses left in the sun for many days. I knew then he was not human. "The sacrifice will not suffice," he whispered, his voice like a cutting wind. "You have broken the pact." My heart froze. There was no pact I knew of, but the elders' tales echoed in my mind. Stories of forgotten agreements between dead kings and the gods, of sacrifices that should never have been stopped. The Draugr was there to collect his debt. I tried to speak, but no words came out. My knees buckled, and he stepped forward, his bony hand reaching for my chest. I felt an icy grip, as if my heart was being crushed. I tried to invoke Odin, Thor, any god who could save me, but their voices were distant, as if they had abandoned me. The temple fell into absolute silence, except for the sound of my labored breathing. When I thought I would meet my end there alone, an invisible force threw me backward. The Draugr vanished, but I knew I wasn't safe. What he said, that pact, something ancient had been broken. On the final night, I knew it would be my turn. Men began to disappear. First the prisoners, then the villagers themselves. The children screamed at night, saying they saw figures lurking in the shadows of their homes. And when I tried to flee, the forest seemed to close around me, like a living trap. The temple now stood empty, save for me and the dead. And I knew my time had come. The torches extinguished one by one, and the silence returned. I felt the cold once more, and this time it would not leave. The Draugr was behind me. This time he would not let me escape. I felt his hand on my shoulder, and the world collapsed. But there was no pain. I opened my eyes and realized I was no longer in the temple. I was in the middle of the forest, standing before an ancient tree. At my feet, an open grave. And inside it, me. I understood at that moment. I had been dead for far longer than I could have imagined. Now, I am only a shadow, like so many others who walk through Uppsala, aimless. The sacrifice never ends.
Florence, 1493. The city throbbed with the glory of the Renaissance. Art, science, and philosophy wove together in a tapestry of revolutionary ideas. My name is Lorenzo, and I lived at the heart of this vibrant world. To others, I was just an apprentice apothecary, a nameless face amidst the bustle of a workshop fragrant with dried herbs and rare extracts. But my true craft was hidden, a clandestine pursuit that consumed me, transforming lead into gold, distilling the essence of eternal life. By day, I ground herbs and mixed tinctures for trivial remedies, but the nights were mine. By the flickering glow of candles, my secret laboratory came alive. Jars brimming with luminous liquids, scrolls scrawled with hermetic formulas, and the metallic tang of mercury thick in the air. Florence was a stage for great ambitions, but mine dwarfed even the Medici. At that time, the quest for the Philosopher's Stone was a dangerous path. It was said that only the pure of heart could unlock its secrets. I laughed at such tales. Purity was not of the heart, but of will, and mine was as unyielding as iron. One night, after months of failed experiments, the solution emerged as if by miracle. It was an opalescent liquid that emitted a subtle glow, like moonlight reflected on water. When I held it up to the light, something inside me cracked. I don't know if it was fear, excitement, or the shadow of a guilt I refused to acknowledge. I drank. The liquid went down like warm honey, and for an instant, it felt as though my body was illuminated from within. But then came the cold. Not an ordinary chill, but an ice that pierced to the bone, as if something essential was being stripped away. In that moment, I realized I had made a mistake that could never be undone. The following day seemed normal. My skin retained its color, my hands still trembled slightly after long hours of work, and my colleagues noticed nothing amiss. But I knew something had changed. The dreams came first. Golden fields turned to barren wastelands. Silver rivers dried before my eyes. Then I began to notice a shift in the people around me, not in their actions, but in their faces. A regular customer came to the shop one morning with his usual serene expression, but as he spoke, I saw his face deteriorate, not physically, but like an old painting cracking with age. That was only the beginning. My hands became a torment. Every touch carried an invisible weight, a force that drained something vital from those I came into contact with. It was as if my skin had become a veil between life and something beyond. I'd avoided touch at all costs, but it wasn't always possible. One day, a woman brought her child to the apothecary, a boy feverish and limp as wax. She begged me to help, placing the child in my hands while she sobbed. I hesitated, but she insisted. I had no time to think before the boy's breath softened to a whisper, then to a terrible stillness. He appeared to sleep, but the quiet on his face revealed something that cut deeper than any blade. The mother screamed. I fled. Solitude became my only companion. I closed the shop, abandoned the city, and hid in the hills surrounding Florence. The relics of my work, my precious laboratory, became a tomb for my ambition. I no longer needed to seek answers. I knew I had found them, and they had condemned me. The years passed, but time seemed to lose meaning. My reflection in the mirror didn't change, but my mind became a battlefield. The laughter of children, the gazes of friends, memories of love, all these things, once mundane, now felt like daggers in my immortal soul. I began to hear voices, soft as leaves rustling in a forest, yet full of ominous promises. They said I had touched the forbidden, something that should never have been reached. They said eternity was not a gift but a prison without a key. And then, on a winter night, as snow fell like ash around my cabin, I finally understood. There was no escape, no redemption. My legacy would not be gold or glory, but an eternal silence where time would be my only executioner. Now I share this with you, stranger, so you know the greatest mistake is not failure, but reaching for what should never be attained.